Researchers have demonstrated how origami-inspired techniques allow them to design thin sheets of material that automatically reconfigure into new two-dimensional, 2D, shapes and three-dimensional, 3D, structures, in response to environmental stimuli. The researchers created a variety of robotic devices as a proof of concept for the approach. Researchers are focused on restoring lower body function after severe spinal injuries using a tiny spinal implant. In new research, the team showcases a map to identify which parts of the spinal cord trigger the hip, knees, ankles and toes, and the areas that put movements together. Mitochondria, tiny structures present in most cells, are known for their energy-generating machinery. Now, researchers have discovered a new function of mitochondria. They set off molecular alarms when cells are exposed to stress or chemicals that can damage DNA, such as chemotherapy. The results could lead to new cancer treatments that prevent tumors from becoming resistant to chemotherapy. Cummings has been keen on the idea for some time. Writing on his blog in 2017, he said that as the UK prepares to exit the European Union, it should think hard about the example of ARPA and how a small group of people can make a huge breakthrough with little money but the right structure. The aviation industry is planning to test whether mimicking the way birds fly in formation can significantly reduce fuel use in an effort to cut emissions. Plane manufacturer Airbus will run 2 demonstrator flights in the first half of next year. The idea, inspired by the V formation that geese migrate in, is for one plane to take off soon after. In the Internet era, invasions of privacy come from 2 main directions. First, large parts of the web have been engineered by commercial companies to monitor our every online move in the name of profit. Google, Facebook and the like make their billions by selling advertising targeted to desires we may not even be aware we have. One of the best studied is what happens when the bright white northern ice cap melts. As it shrinks, the sun's light and warmth that was previously reflected back into space by snow and ice is instead absorbed by the dark oceans. Those warmed oceans then lap at the ice, causing it to melt more, potentially leading to a runaway cycle of melting. By the end of the 5 days, an estimated 26 people had died in the country's hospitals as a result of the power outage, according to figures collated by Doctors for Health, a group of concerned medics that have been monitoring the growing health crisis in Venezuela. Among those who died were kidney failure patients, who could not get the vital dialysis treatment they needed. These events, however, are minor in comparison to the kind of power outages that experts fear could be in store in the future. Growing demand on our electricity supplies from rising populations and new technologies like electric cars will face increasing instability as we shift to more renewable but intermittent energy sources like wind and solar power. Despite Rex's assertion that we are ahead of schedule, there is an urgency to reach a decision. The height of the sun rising above the horizon is getting lower with every day, and soon it will not appear at all, making practical work on the ice a lot more difficult. But researchers haven't definitively linked consumption of cholesterol to an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. As a result, US dietary guidelines no longer have a cholesterol restriction, nor does the UK. Instead, emphasis is placed on limiting how much saturated fat we consume, which can increase the risk of developing cardiovascular disease. Until now, the major challenge has been finding a sweet spot from which they can allow themselves to become frozen into the sea ice and begin drifting. They have to avoid passing into known danger zones, areas inaccessible to resupply operations, and the Russian exclusive economic zone, where they are not permitted to do research. They will also be accompanied by a trained bear guard. Polar bears are the other main danger on the ice, besides falling into the sub-zero waters. The guards that accompany every group that ventures onto the ice have several methods of defense, starting with flares to scare them away, and ending with a rifle as a last resort. One vital feature may have allowed dogs to leapfrog cats to our affection. A study from Portsmouth University found that dogs have learned to mimic the expressions of infants, which triggers a desire to nurture in their human owners. The change seems to have been the development of a muscle, which raises the inner eyebrow, and it's not something found in their wolf ancestors. Scotland has a long and distinguished history in banking, with the Bank of Scotland in Edinburgh opening its doors in 1695, only a year later than the Bank of England, itself started by a Scotsman, William Paterson. Today, Scotland hosts the headquarters of two of Europe's top 10 banks, the Royal Bank of Scotland, the world's fifth largest bank, and HBOS. The local people here have cultivated an alarmingly close relationship with these powerful reptiles, which live in sacred ponds around the town. According to local legend, the first chief of Paga was saved by a crocodile while on a hunting expedition, and he decreed that none of his people would harm the animals from that day forward. It's our emotional response to climate change. For people whose lives are already changing for the worse, climate change takes a heavy mental toll. Even for those much more protected from the immediate effects, typically in rich, developed nations, there are reports of growing numbers of people seeking treatment for climate anxiety. Making a choice to cut back or cut out flying in your personal life is one thing, but work poses another problem for people who fly for their jobs. Some organizations are already getting behind the movement, though. Academia is another flight-heavy industry where people are making changes. Both questions were open to forecasters from 3 May until the 22nd of May 2019. On the date of closure, forecasters put the likelihood of the Brexit Party getting between 30% and 35% of the national vote at 33%. Forecasters appeared confident that the Brexit Party would gain a substantial proportion of votes. They gave the party a 12% chance of gaining less than 20% of the vote. China has plans to build its own space station, which would also be visible periodically with a naked eye if completed. SpaceX has also been granted permission to launch nearly 12,000 Starlink satellites to provide broadband internet access in remote locations. The first 60 of the Starlink satellites were launched in May, at an altitude of 270. The Moon, with the nighttime luminance providing a comforting presence in the dark, has helped us mark the passage of the months as it waxes and wanes. Telescopes have more recently provided us the opportunity to glimpse the more turbulent universe beyond our own solar system, where violent supernovae and supermassive black holes capable of swallowing entire galaxies lurk. Analysis of conversations between doctors and parents, talking about the well-being of a child reveals they can often look like negotiations, even though they are not intended to be. Very specific behaviors on the part of the parent lead to a significant increase in prescriptions of antibiotics. What sets them apart from a negotiation is that the parents will not explicitly ask for antibiotics. But for decades, eating eggs has also been controversial due to their high cholesterol content, which some studies have linked to an increased risk of heart disease. One egg yolk contains around 185 milligrams of cholesterol, which is more than half of the 300 milligrams daily amount of cholesterol that the U.S. dietary guidelines recommended until recently. The young couple teaches restoration skills, such as traditional carpentry, to local construction workers in the hope of saving traditional techniques, and thus the community's rich architectural heritage. Herberth, just like his ancestors would have, even brings raw wood by horse and cart from the local forest, which he says incurs far less waste and is more environmentally friendly. This ancient cacao tree originated in the Amazon jungle, and holds the distinction of being the oldest and rarest variety, its existence dating back at least 5,300 years. Between the 17th and 19th centuries, the Pure Nacional was widely cultivated in Ecuador, where its coveted pods helped fuel what was then the world's largest supply of cacao. Molten rock that reaches the surface of the earth is, of course, called lava. How syrupy or watery the lava is depends on the kind of rocks being melted. Goopier magma and lava tends to cause more explosive eruptions and form steep-sided volcanoes, while runnier rocks tend to ooze out and create gradually sloping volcanoes. Egyptian officials are making plans to open a newly expanded Suez Canal on August 6. Officials say the new canal will be more than double the waterway's earnings over the next 10 years. But some experts say the project alone will not be able to turn around Egypt's economy. The expansion of the current canal means 2 ships will be able to sail by each other. As families become smaller, the traditional family support network is disappearing, and this can have a negative impact on children as they grow up. In a nuclear family or single-parent household, childcare becomes an expensive and stressful part of daily life. Without the help of grandparents or aunts and uncles, busy parents must rely on babysitters, nannies, and after-school clubs. Electricity, which arrived in this area just 3 years ago, is only available in a few homes, and supply can be inconsistent. It only works about 5 days a week, and you never know which 5 days these will be. And with few paved roads, residents of this remote region rely on mules and bicycles for transportation. Radio is a much more effective medium than books for the communication of up-to-date information. We can listen to news broadcasts about events as they happen, and a key benefit of radio is that we can listen to it while doing other activities, such as driving or working. The main drawback of radio, when compared to books or television, is that there is no visual element. The body's clocks may have difficulty staying synchronized, which may lead to harm. One limitation of the study is that researchers only studied sleep for 1 week. So the patient's longer-term sleep behavior is unknown. Researchers also lacked information on things that affect sleep consistency, like eating breakfast and meal timing, both of which also affect metabolic health. India has more than 100 million adult smokers, making it a huge potential market for e-cigarette companies. Vaping, which involves inhaling a mix typically made of nicotine, water, solvents and flavors, is seen as an alternative to smoking which can help you quit, but its impact on health is still not fully known. China now has 2,000 fishing boats, more than any other country. In 2013, an European Parliament study estimated that between 2000 and 2011 Chinese fishermen caught 4.6 million tons of fish every year. It said most of the fish came from African waters. The rest came from Asia and smaller amounts from Central and South America and Antarctica. It is undeniable that the Internet has led to a dramatic expansion in the number of choices that are available to us. The number of online media options, for instance, is now almost endless. There are countless websites offering entertainment, news, videos, on-demand TV and music streaming, many of which are free. The trend towards people living alone, is perhaps even more damaging because of the psychological effects of reduced human interaction. Individuals who live on their own have nobody to talk to in person, so they cannot share problems or discuss the highs and lows of daily life. They forego the constant stimulation and hustle and bustle of a large family. The United States job market has millions of unfilled jobs. Many of those jobs require technical skills. However, employers say many of those jobs are vacant because they cannot find people with the right skills to do the work. Labor experts call this paradox the skills gap. A number of efforts have been launched to better understand and solve it. Professor Andrew Lambert teaches naval history at King's College in London. He says the success of the canal will depend largely on the health of the world's shipping industry. He says that is something Egypt cannot control. And he says even if the expanded canal is successful, he does not think it will improve the lives of average Egyptians. Now the problem was how to get the astronauts back to Earth, as quickly and safely as possible. They were more than 2/3 of the way to the moon on a flight path that would take them to a moon landing. They needed to change their flight path, to take them around the moon and back toward Earth. The new report is called Causes and Consequences of Income Inequality, a Global Perspective. Ms. Kocher said, inequality trends have been mixed in emerging markets and developing countries. Some countries are experiencing falling inequality rates, with poor people and the middle class making gains. However, pervasive inequities in education, healthcare, and finance remain in areas. Our findings are very consistent with the hypothesis that the white matter is the key to explain this result. In our brains, we have two main tissues, one is white matter. The other is grey matter. And we know that grey matter is more responsible for people's math skills. But white matter is more related to people's language skills. Iran is the regional rival of Saudi Arabia and an opponent of the US, which pulled out of a treaty aimed at limiting Tehran's nuclear program after Mr. Trump took power. US-Iran tensions have risen markedly this year. The US said Iran was behind attacks on 2 oil tankers in the Gulf in June and July, as well as on another 4 in May. A new study from brain researchers helps explain how the human brain evolved, or changed over time, to permit people to speak and write. This new research may also help people who are learning a new language. Michael Ullman is the lead researcher. He is a professor at Georgetown University Medical School in Washington, D.C. He has been studying language learning for more than 20 years. Much happened in the months after America decided to go to the moon. New space flight centers were built. Designs for launch rockets and spacecraft were agreed on. And a new spaceflight program, Project Gemini, was begun. Flights in the 2-man Gemini spacecraft tested the men, equipment and methods to be used in the Apollo program to the moon. China is expanding the size of its fishing boat fleet to try to provide enough food for its citizens and to export. But as the boats travel the world, they are often criticized for overfishing and for having conflicts with ships from other countries, especially in disputed parts of the South China Sea. A patent is the legal right of an inventor to a process or a product, even a plant. To get this right, the inventor has to demonstrate the qualities that make the patented plant different from other plants. The inventor must show that the plant has been reproduced asexually. This usually means that the plant is cut or its tissues have been connected to another plant. The researchers studied about 25,000 people from across China. Between 2010 and 2014, these Chinese men, women and children were given language and math tests. Then researchers compared the test results with measurements of pollution in the air, namely nitrogen dioxide and sulfur dioxide. To stay healthy, the report suggests that people do at least 150 minutes of moderate physical activity or 75 minutes of intense physical activity every week. It also urges governments to provide and care for infrastructure, such as better and safer roads. This would help support increased walking and cycling for transportation, as well as sports and physical recreation. As the US prepares to return to the Moon, other countries have launched their own missions to the Moon. In January, an unmanned Chinese spacecraft successfully touched down on the far side of the Moon. An Israeli robotic lander, however, crashed on its final descent in April. And India landed a Chandrayaan-2 rover in July. For real estate investors and vacation rental managers who want to generate consistent revenue with minimal risk, markets with low seasonality are generally seen as more desirable. While seasonal markets can be highly lucrative, they're subject to conditions that are outside of your control that can lead to dramatic shifts in rental revenue. American astronauts in Apollo 11 landed on the Moon July 20, 1969. A second landing was made 4 months later. Both flights were almost perfect. Everything worked as planned. Everyone expected the third moon landing flight, Apollo 13, would go as well as the first two. But it did not.